Welcome everyone to the next edition of the DK Down Under Show. Smatho 10 and Big Hef here from Daily Fantasy Rankings, breaking down Thursday night AFL, the Brisbane Lions and the Geelong Cats in Sydney of all places. Round 6 of the AFL is all at neutral grounds this weekend. So as I welcome into my co-host Hef here, how are you looking at this DraftKings slate today?
Well, we know Geelong are very good at home. We know Brisbane are very good at home. I don't know how either of them are going to go against each other in Sydney. So we'll sort of take away the home ground advantage and play with some raw numbers maybe.
Maybe. All right, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel here at dailyfantasyrankings.com.au. Make sure you like our content on Twitter as well. Always available on our website is the AFL resources, including our free data tools. And today, Hef, we launched a new tool for our readers of the site. It's called Centre Bounce Appearances, or CBAs, we like to call it here in Australia. Do you want to give the viewers of the show what are CBAs and how they can link up to fantasy?
Okay, so for overseas viewers who might not quite know all the rules in Aussie rules footy, we can have 4 players from each team in the centre bounce. So at the start of the quarters and after a goal's kicked, and obviously those 4 guys get first crack at the ball once the ball's bounced. And generally the players who are in there will follow the ball around for most of the game. So if a player is getting these centre bounce attendances, they are getting more opportunity to score points, and it generally reflects in their averages. So if you're in the centre bounces, you're getting their chance, and if you're left out of the centre bounces, you're up against it from the start.
I've got the table here from the Adelaide Crows through 2020 here, and as you can see here, we've got Riley O'Brien, who is the ruckman. He's the sole ruckman, and he's getting the majority of these centre bounce appearances. And if you look at the midfielders here, there's a bloke called here, Rory Sloane, who was getting many appearances throughout the first few rounds, and then you can see a fat 0 there. So that could indicate a trend that Rory Sloane is now playing in a different position, and therefore his fantasy output could be lower than usual. So make sure you get to Daily Fantasy Rankings. Look for our data tools. It's in one of the menus there on the main page. All right, Hef, let's have a look at this game on Thursday night. And look, mate, this is a tough one to crack. So apologies to all and sundry tonight or today to say, look, play this guy. It's going to be a bit of a handful, this one. It's Geelong, who are currently outsiders at plus 125. They're taking on the Lions, who are at minus 160. The total's 129.5, and the spread's around a goal, 6.5 points. The teams that came out tonight here in Australia, so Jack Stephen, who is a midfielder, has been managed, which means he's been given a rest. Sam Simpson, he's an AFL player, he's been around the traps for quite a while, doesn't get much game time, so he comes in for the Cats. And as expected, Brisbane midfielder Dane Zorko has returned from his calf/Achilles injury, and he takes the spot of Cam Ellis-Yeoman, who also is out with a calf injury. So let's break down this particular game by position, and we said it was hard, but also we've got the most easiest choice to start with straight up in the ruck position, because we only got 2 players to choose from, and they're both from the same team. So Hef, take it away. 50-50 choice here. Who are you looking at?
It's an easy decision. Well, it's an interesting decision, I think. I'm going to lean with Steph Martin with the price saving, 5,000 compared to the 6,200 from McInerney. Now, these guys are going to share the ruck. Martin is traditionally the number 1 ruckman for Brisbane, but he's had a pretty slow start to the year, and McInerney has definitely been the better scorer. But Martin, when they're both at their best, I still think Martin's a better player. I'm not going to go heavily onto Martin. If you play multiple teams, I'd recommend a bit of an even spread between the two, but forced to pick one, I think I prefer to save the 1,200 and go with Steph Martin.
Yeah, easy choice. Single entry, cash, 5K. Steph Martin goes into the ruck position, and just hopefully he has more time in the middle. All right, so move on to defence, and when I check the points against here on dailyfantasyrankings.com.au, these 2 teams do not give up much fantasy points in this particular position. So It's going to be tough here. I'm going to start with one particular player that I want to get your thoughts on, and his name is Harris Andrews at 3,000. He's actually a key defender, but considering that these teams don't give up much points, can I just go cheap and hopefully these guys can hit value?
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. If it's going to be hard for these defenders to score more so than usual, then maybe we could look to save salary here and spend it up at the other positions. We've got plenty of midfielders we can spend our money on. I quite like your player there of Andrews. The 3,000 price tag is really cheap considering he's even averaging 44 in what has been a pretty plain fantasy scoring season for him. So it's very hard to go wrong there with Andrews at just 3,000. I'm looking at another couple of cheaper guys. Grant Birchall is an experienced player who might take it upon himself to step up here in what's a pretty big clash here against Geelong at just 4,000. If you do want to spend up, my favourite pick would be Dan Rich at 6,300. He's an excellent user of the ball, and he's the one guy that the Brisbane Lions will look to get the ball to with his prodigious left foot. So that's where I'm looking at in defenders, but I'm really not excited by this position at all, and I wouldn't turn you off playing anyone, to be honest.
Fair enough, fair enough. I'm just going to lock in Andrews in our little side here, our little course. So let's move on to the midfield. And obviously, there's much better options here. We talked about on previous editions of the Down Under show about Geelong's midfield. They're quite very good at sharing the fantasy point load around. Some players will go off, while others who might take a back seat here. First player I want to talk about is Patrick Dangerfield. Now, we all got suckered into him at 6,900 last week and was pretty much a mediocre score to his lofty standards. And then DraftKings have posted an $8,000 price tag for him. So is it a brave decision to go to Dangerfield? A very low ownership considering you've got better options elsewhere. Or can we go contrarian with Dangerfield?
Look, I love the move here from DraftKings, putting him in at 8,000. He's a very easy player for everyone to play when he's down in that sort of 7,000 price range, Dangerfield, because we all know that he has at times been the best player in the competition. He might not be that now, but he's still got it in him, I think. 8,000 makes it a really good decision, though. But if you do want to play Dangerfield, I think that's going to take his ownership down from what it would have been. Brisbane are really hard to score against through the midfield. They've got a really strong core group of midfielders, and they work really well together. And there's a bit of defence to them as well. One point I want to look at here is Lachie Neale, who's at 9,200. He's the biggest scoring player in the competition this year. Give or take a couple of points. I haven't checked that stat. You probably check that for me later, Smatho. The problem here is he's getting so much attention. Teams are going to start tagging him, and Geelong have the option to use Cam Guthrie here to tag him. So not only does that make that 9,200 price tag start to look expensive with the chance of a tag, but it also possibly hurts the scoring potential of Guthrie himself, who at 5,400, he's shown he's able to score 100 this year. So he looks pretty well priced on that basis. But if he's going to spend his whole game focusing on stopping Lachie Neale from getting the ball, then that's going to have a drastic impact on his output as well.
I really like Mitch Duncan at 7,600 as a cash option. As we talked about, Brisbane Lions are tough to score against, but the Cats midfield do like scoring a lot of fancy points this year. Is there any merit in Duncan or any other options that are around this price tag?
I think Duncan's well priced at 7,600. I think he's definitely in play. I think Hugh McCluggage is very much in play at 7,300. Parfitt at 7,100 is also, he's a gun tackler. He's leading the league in tackles. And if this is going to be a close contested game up here at the SCG, I think he's right in play. Even down to Jared Berry, who has had a few really big weeks, and he's still only 6,500. His salary hasn't quite caught up with his output. The only thing against Berry is we see the return of Dane Zorko, which might affect his time through the midfield a little bit. Zorko is a really interesting one to talk about there at 5,800. at his best, Dane Zorko is an $8,000 player. So, well, I think he, despite having the injury setback, I don't think they'd be risking him if he wasn't good to go. So at 5,800, like any midfield time at all for Dane Zorko, I'd expect him to get it. He just looks too cheap.
Excellent. All right, let's have Zorko and Mitch Duncan. Before we move on to the forwards, we've got a new player. We talked about Mr. Samson. Is it Samson? Yeah, Simpson. Sorry. Simpson. He's 3,200. The cheat sheets on DFR have him projected as 39 points. So any merit him as your fourth midfielder, or just look to really stack with premium guys here?
Well, Simpson's... Well, last time we saw him, there wasn't a whole lot of him. He's only 22, but he hasn't played since 2018, where he only had one game for 31, averaged 39 across 5 games in 2017. I don't think he's got the upside to really worry about playing him. We've talked about it's easy to play cheap guys, but like I'd be surprised. I'd be shocked, actually, if he got more than about 40. So by not playing him, I don't think you're ever going to lose out by too much. And we do have cheap options like Harris Andrews and the forward line that we'll get to, that I don't necessarily think we need to go down the Simpson path.
Very good. All right, let's move on to the forwards then. So you'll find that the Geelong ruck options are in the forward line here with Darcy Fort and Asava Radigalia. But Brisbane's actual forward line's in real red-hot form. That's why they're up towards the top of the ladder here. Turns out if you click the value button on the cheat sheet on DFR, you find that there are the top 5 or 6 are actually forwards for value here. So players like Mccarthy, Radigalia, Tom Berry, McStay, even Dowhouse, etc. They're all forward eligible and seem to be popping out in your crunches this week. So wade through these options here. I don't really have a take on who should I really target.
Well, the thing about the Brisbane forward line, they're very even. They don't have your traditional stars. Charlie Cameron would be their major star, but he's an opportunistic small forward, so he's not the type of guy that really stands up fantasy-wise. An interesting one for American players who do love a revenge narrative in American sports. We hear that all the time. Lincoln McCarthy comes up top on our cheat sheets, and he is a former Geelong Cat, so if he's ever going to get up to play, it'll be against Geelong, and he's really well priced there at 3,900. Another cheap guy is Tommy Berry. Is it Tommy Berry? I think it's Tommy Berry.
Yeah, Thomas Berry, 3,100.
Tommy Berry's the jockey down here. He's a younger brother of Jared Berry. In time, I think he'll be a midfielder. He's probably forced to cut his teeth a bit up forward to start his career. 3,100, though, coming off a 50 against Port Adelaide, who are traditionally pretty hard to score against themselves. I think that makes him quite easy to play as one of your value options. One guy I'm looking to stay away from Geelong is Tom Hawkins. Harris Andrews is likely to pick him up, and he's been in super form, shutting down the big forwards of opposition sides. So I think Tom Hawkins has got his work cut out. My favourite play for Geelong, Parfitt, the midfielder we've mentioned, he's probably going to be their leading scorer up forward. But I do like Darcy Fort, who will be their ruckman. He got a lot more ruck time by himself last week. At 4,000, I think he's got a really good floor. I wouldn't think he'd go less than about 40. And for that point, I think he's pretty good value at 4,000. He's not going to ruin your team, which a lot of these forwards potentially might.
All right, so final thoughts in terms of lineup construction in this particular match. Brisbane are favourites. We're at a neutral ground. The fantasy stats don't really have us much edges at all. So would stacks be in play, or look for more of a balanced lineup?
Oh, look, I think stacks are in play. I think there is the possibility that one of these teams, more likely Brisbane, to get a hold of Geelong. But I definitely think stacks are always in play in these single games. There's so many ways you can attack this game, and I think if you spend up through the midfield, spend down at other positions, and hope for the best.
Hope for the best. All right, well, make sure you check out our content on rotogrottos.com. We've got our 3 slate preview for this particular match, along with links to our data tools on dailyfantasyrankings.com.au. Hef and myself will be back on Friday to break down the Hawks and Magpies. Make sure you follow us on Twitter as well, at RankingsDFS. Shoot us a line anytime if you got any questions about AFL DFS. Mate, Hef, thank you much for your thoughts tonight. Very tough slate this one, but good luck if you're entering on DraftKings this weekend.
Yeah, exactly. Good luck. You'll need it for this one.
Thanks, mate. We'll see you next time on the DK Down Under Show.
Sounds good.